Chapter 6, Cassidy Hughes. Wednesday, September 6th, 8:42 p.m. Cassidy flipped through channels as Emma curled up beside her on the couch. "Are we going to watch something, or are you going to keep going too fast to see what's on?" Emma asked. "I'm going to keep going too fast to see," Cassidy said. "What do you want to watch?" Emma said nothing, but then again, what else was there to say? They'd both exhausted themselves, talking and crying, then talking some more. Cassidy had done everything she could to comfort her niece, swearing that everything would be okay, and giving her hope and comfort in the way her sister would have wanted, as opposed to the angry death rattle from Vivian. Fortunately, Vivian was in the other room, sleeping off her countless glasses of wine. It must have been especially confusing for Emma, losing her mother, then staying with someone who looked so much like her. Genetics made them identical, though life and their ages made it easy to tell them apart. Sarah had softened edges, while Cassidy's years of hard living were clear from the lines under her eyes to the matching, faded pink scars lining both her wrists. Cassidy found an episode of SpongeBob SquarePants and left it on. She wasn't sure if Emma even liked the show, but at least she could be certain Nickelodeon wouldn't break into programming with pictures of Sarah and news footage of bodies in black bags outside of the school. "Are we going to stay at Graham's forever?" Emma nudged herself closer. Cassidy wished she knew, for herself and for Emma. But it wasn't as though Sarah's death had been marked on the calendar. There was no contingency plan, just a drunken promise 2 years earlier when Sarah made Cassidy swear on her life that she would take Emma if anything happened to her, since their mother was too batshit crazy and unreliable to be trusted for the job. And sure, their mom may have been crazy, but that didn't mean Cassidy was any better suited for the job. At least their mom had raised children before, 2 of them in fact. And she'd done a good job with at least one. What in the fuck did Cassidy know about raising a child? She shouldn't have to deal with raising a child. But then again, what choice did she have? Sarah was right about their mom, and Cassidy sure as shit wasn't going to give Emma over to her father. The way Jon had looked at Emma at the service made Cassidy wonder if he'd figured things out, or if perhaps Warren had told him the truth after all these years. And if so, what then? Would he sweep in with his high-priced attorneys and take Emma away? While Cassidy didn't know the first thing about raising a kid, Emma was family, and she'd be damned if she'd give her up to Jon Conway. His family had done too much, hurt too many people, to ever be entrusted with a sweet child like Emma. And while Jon was perhaps the best of the lot, it wasn't saying much. He might not be an evil prick, but she'd seen him on TV getting drunk, fighting with paparazzi, sleeping with models, actresses, and singers. He was just as much of an addict as she was. No way she could turn Emma over. Cassidy stroked Emma's hair as she pulled the girl into a tight hug. Tears streamed down Cassidy's face as she wondered what in the hell she would do next. She was sick and goddamn tired of being at the mercy of others, particularly the Conways. She should have left Hamilton Island years ago when she had a chance. Now she had obligations. A mother who, despite what she said, needed her, and now a child to take care of. "Why did you have to die, Sarah?" Fuck. Cassidy felt a flash of guilt. Sarah had been dead since Friday, but Cassidy had barely had time to miss or mourn her twin sister before she was thrust into the role of caregiver. She had to arrange the funeral, call people, and talk with lawyers and insurance people. Someone had already screwed up, cremating Sarah instead of burying her properly, for which Cassidy was being blamed by her mom. Just another Cassidy fuck-up. Cassidy wasn't sure if burying ashes was better for Emma than seeing her mom's dead body, but she thought maybe it was. Perhaps she should thank God for the mistake that spared Emma one more horrible memory. The past few days had been filled with too much to do, and Cassidy hadn't even had time to sort through her own feelings of loss. Sarah was not only her twin, but her best friend. Perhaps the worst part in all of this was that Cassidy had known Sarah would die. 3 weeks ago, Cassidy had fallen asleep in front of the TV and woke up thinking someone was in her apartment. There wasn't anyone there. But as she woke, she remembered a dream she'd had, vivid as daylight. Someone at the school had started shooting kids. A bullet went through the wall between the classrooms and struck Sarah, killing her instantly. The dream on its own might not have meant much. However, she had the dream again every night for the next 2 weeks. Every night. She wanted to tell Sarah about the dream, warn her. But what could she say that wouldn't make her sister think she was using again? When Cassidy had been using, she'd had several instances where she dreamed something that was going to happen. They were little things usually, but accurate enough to make shit weird. So she told Sarah. But she'd been so manic when she told Sarah that her sister came down hard on her, knowing that she was using. There was no way Cassidy could tell Sarah about these dreams without her sister thinking she was using again. And besides, she hadn't had any of her weird, prophetic dreams since she'd stopped using. In all likelihood, she figured these were just regular dreams, fueled by a preoccupation of Cassidy's fears of responsibility for others. So, she kept her mouth shut, not wanting to see that familiar look of disappointment in her twins' eyes. She could take that look from her mom, her friends, her lovers and co-workers, but not from Sarah. She didn't care if everyone in her life thought she was the black sheep of the family, the bad sister and the fuck-up. But letting Sarah down was the last thing in the world she wanted to do. She owed her sister too much. And yet, in not telling her sister of the dreams, she had done just that. She let her down. And now, Sarah was dead. Cassidy began to cry harder. Emma saw and felt Cassidy's tears. She put a hand on Cassidy's face, wiping a tear away, saying in a soft voice, "It'll be okay, Aunt Cassidy." Cassidy squeezed her eyes, and Emma tighter, wishing she could believe the child. Emma fell asleep in Cassidy's arms, and Cassidy found her eyes glazing over from the soft glow of the TV cartoons, her mind returning to a familiar place. She couldn't take much more. The familiar itch began to gnaw at her brain, telling her how to make everything okay. The pills. Once an addict, always an addict. For the first time in who knew how long, Cassidy needed the drugs. Not wanted the drugs. She always wanted the drugs. She was a fucking addict, always would be, and life for an addict was one day at a time. But now, she needed them. Again. The addict lived in the back of her brain, nested like a parasite crouching in the dark, waiting for its host to grow less vigilant, more complacent, no longer willing to do the hard work of digging the well and dipping the bucket into the pure water. Cassidy had a friend, Gina, who had been her Narcotics Anonymous sponsor. She'd been hooked on the hardcore shit, heroin, and was sober for 4 years. But sure as shit, 3 months ago she went back out and started to use. 1 month ago she died. Once an addict, always an addict. There is no starting over. The addict in the back of your brain can nudge its way to the front whenever the fuck it wants. It drives the bus when it decides to get behind the goddamned wheel, or when life makes it an offer it can't refuse. Cassidy would never be cured, could never afford to walk away from the things that got her sober and kept her clean. Like Sarah, and Emma, and the 3 of them together. Once an addict, always an addict. Cassidy could picture the look in her new sponsor's eyes when she called in the morning to tell Roberta she'd relapsed. She could hear Roberta's voice saying she'd already buried too many friends and didn't want to bury another. No, she didn't have to relapse. Except she did. Once an addict, always an addict. The addict inside her was working hard, hungry for its first pill in 3 years, 7 months, and 16 days. Each of those days filled with emotions that threatened to steal her sobriety at any moment. Pain, fear, fury, guilt, rage, grief, panic, dread, anger, agony, blame, terror, misery, sorrow, despair, torture, sadness, suffering, bitterness, resentment, indignation. And now those feelings were returning in full force, and all at once ready to take her at her weakest moment. One pill. Instant gratification. Immediate relief from every unpleasant emotion. Relief and relapse were both a phone call away. Her addict was doing a Snoopy dance inside her, knowing Cassidy was minutes from crossing to the darker side of her inner fissure. The little girl who had lost her mother might be months away from losing her aunt. Hell, maybe Emma was better off with Jon Conway. Who was she to think she could ever take care of another when she could barely take care of herself? Once an addict, always an addict. She rose and carried Emma to her bedroom at Graham's house. Surprisingly, Emma barely stirred as Cassidy slipped her into her bed and covered her in the same strawberry-colored blanket she'd had since she was 4. Cassidy then passed her mother's room, the door ajar, the blue light of the TV illuminating the woman in bed, sleeping away her half-bottle of Pinot, which was on the nightstand. Cassidy left the house, dialing Craig's number before she even had her car in reverse. She had to call Craig instead of Lewis, since Lewis worked at the shipwreck and had a big mouth. Craig was more expensive, but he knew how to shut the fuck up. Besides, Lewis was sometimes dry. Craig never was. The addict inside her didn't want her clean side to get a chance to fight back. Craig was happy to hear her voice and ready at the door when she traded several 20s for a barely rattling bottle. Once an addict, always an addict. Cassidy was going to go back to her apartment to zone out, but decided she'd get less friction if she went back to her mom's place and slept in one of the 2 guest rooms as she'd done for the past 2 nights. She went to the guest room set up for her and crawled into bed. She pulled the covers over herself, clicked on the TV, and found an old episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm. Cassidy slipped 2 pills out of the bottle, downed them with a bottle of Diet Coke, and closed her eyes, waiting for sweet oblivion to claim her.